Starring Riven, you're immediately thrown into the deep end. A person gives you a short briefing, and then you're teleported via a book to a strange island called Riven, where upon your arrival, you're immediately imprisoned and robbed before a stranger takes out your captor and frees you. What just happened? You explore your surroundings and find this strange temple-like room. Scarab sculptures reveal paintings that look like stained glass, depicting the story of an imposing, almost godlike figure. You note there are a couple of doorways, some of them blocked. You can rotate the entire room to change the connection between those doorways, but you then find out you can't enter all rooms from your current vantage point. So you go outside and wander. You discover a shabby locked door that might lead to another doorway. You see this strange arrowhead sticking out. It points to a hinge, and as you click on it, soon enough, you now know a little bit more on how to proceed, but more questions are popping up in your head. What was the meaning of that arrowhead? Why are there exactly 5 doorways? Who is that godlike figure in the paintings? You remember the guy in the opening spoke of capturing Gan? Was that him? Close by the temple is another room, which seemed to be an altar of sorts. You see a giant empty orb, flanked by these sculptures of creatures, which are surrounded by offerings. If you explore this mini island further, you can find a room with a seat with a similar orb. Sit on the seat and you can see a camera feed on the place of worship. You realize what's happening. This is a recording room, and whoever is using this room is appearing like a hologram to the people of this island, Wizard of Oz style, fashioning themselves a god thanks to their technology and appropriation of the local religion. This is how the game Riven works in a nutshell. You explore the world and solve puzzles to progress, discovering the lore of the world by figuring out how all the different contraptions work. The beauty of Riven is that these gameplay elements are not separate things functioning as a reward for one another. You depend on them both. In order to learn about the story, you need to find the puzzles. In order to solve the puzzles, you need to understand the story. It makes for an engrossing, immersive experience that few games can measure up to. Soon enough, you feel like a detective, solving elaborate secrets, hidden agendas, and conspiracies. And they're hidden for good reason. The antagonist of the game, Gen, is fashioning himself as a god, thanks to his abuse of the core magic mechanic of the series, the ability to teleport to any world of your imagination via magic books. He's trapped on the island, however, and thus he forces the population to cut down the trees so he can turn it into paper to try and write an escape world. So a resistance force has sprung up on the island. In order to defeat Gen, you have to find clues all over the archipelago of their secret hideout entry code. This puzzle arc isn't just a cool puzzle, it shows the cultural conflict of the island. Just like a sketchy Christian missionary teaching English, Gen has brought so-called education to the people of Riven, teaching the people his numbering system from his home culture. Problem is, the Rivenese already have their own. You need to understand both number systems in order to decode the secret codes of both Gen and the Resistance in order to solve all puzzles. But it's also a great illustration of cultural colonialism. Gen is trying to impose his own language over the language of the local culture. The Myst series, especially Riven, has an interesting aspect to its lore. Core to the lore, of course, is the ability to teleport to any world you can imagine via books. But an important yet subtle aspect to this ability is the belief that people writing these books don't create these worlds, they merely link to one individual world out of an infinite possibility of worlds, which technically already exist. Like quantum physics, writing to it merely collapses part of the possibilities into something concrete and individual. But Gen doesn't believe in this. He believes that he is the god of the world he creates. If you took this principle that worlds written by the writer aren't created by them and applied it to the real world, it would be downright heretical. Not even killing the author went this far. It's not feasible to say nobody wrote this, but to say that everyone creating something is wholly unique is also not true. Every creation links in a way to what has come before, from genre conventions to direct inspirations, to just plain old wisdom from others on how to write a good, cohesive story. as an author, you always link to a broader cultural background. Plus, with Gen being the villain, we can see where sole proprietorship of fiction leads to, ignoring everything that has come before you, claiming a monopoly on the rules and details, even if they contradict what's in the text to begin with. No wonder that this belief in full ownership has led Gen to embrace colonialism. There's a violent power in deciding what the definitive narrative is, in the ability to override all the marginalized voices who have nevertheless contributed to what came before. Being an author doesn't make you God. It's a simple thing, yet unfortunately in Riven as in the real world, some people do forget that. Riven is a great game, where its story isn't a neat distraction from gameplay or a mere justification for expensive graphics. The gameplay is learning about the culture, the history, the conflict of a place, noting down everything you see as possible hints until you truly understand the game world. But what I find personally fascinating about this game is how it follows the possible end scenario of its own lore, of a creator so proprietary he deems himself a god and yet so unaware of his own limits that he doesn't see how his own flaws lead to his own downfall. I wonder how the creators of the game saw themselves, both in 1997 when they were making the original game and went through extraordinary lengths to try and break game boundaries, and now in 2024 when they had to retrace their own steps for the remake and be reminded of their own flaws. Is it a perfect game? Of course not even a remake. In fact, the whole part of the Rivenese having their own numbering system was missing in the original game. You can question how truly anti-colonial this game is in myriad of ways, or if this game still has a white colonial perspective. Cyan has espoused Riven and their other games as non-violent games where you don't have to kill, in an industry where you stomp or shoot your enemies. But even this game shows that violence is still necessary in order to resist brutal powers. It's a shame, however, that these are one of the many paths that games as a whole have tried at one point but then abandoned. Games are art, no doubt about it, but outsiders have been rightfully critical of video games because the industry as a whole has been loath to create games that might be uncomfortable for the status quo. It's in these aspects that the work still needs to be written.